While others sleep, humans evolve. Don't miss the next step, subscribe now. The Judgment of Scales. The sacrifice pit loomed below Princess Lyra like a gaping wound in the crystalline surface of Draconia Prime. Hundreds of scaled nobles watched from their elevated perches, their gemstone eyes gleaming with anticipation. Not one voice rose in her defense, not even her father, Emperor Vexus, whose 12-foot frame dominated the royal platform. For the crime of questioning the eternal wisdom and advocating peace with the lesser realms, High Priest Drax announced, his voice echoing across the amphitheater, Princess Lyra of House Solaran is sentenced to the Judgment of Scales. May the great dragons determine her worth. Lyra kept her chin high, her silver eyes, a mark of royal blood, meeting her father's identical gaze. She had known the consequences of speaking against the Empire's expansionist policies. The Draconian Empire had conquered 17 star systems in the past century alone. Father, she said, loud enough for all to hear, remember what Mother taught us. There is strength in compassion. Emperor Vexus's tail twitched, the only indication that her words had any effect. With a subtle nod to the guards, he sealed her fate. The guards released the magnetic bonds. Lyra fell, her ceremonial dress billowing around her like broken wings. The 50-foot drop seemed to last an eternity, memories of her 32 years flashing before her eyes, her mother's gentle lessons before her mysterious death, her own education in the arts of war and diplomacy, and her growing disillusionment with the empire she was born to rule. The impact knocked the wind from her lungs. Lyra rolled to absorb the shock, a technique from her military training. Rising to her feet, she surveyed her new prison. The pit was a natural cavern nearly a mile in diameter with smooth, unclimbable walls. Stalactites hung from the distant ceiling like petrified tears. The stone floor was littered with bones, some recognizably draconian, others from species she couldn't identify. A low growl echoed from one of the many tunnel entrances that dotted the perimeter. Lyra's infrared vision detected a massive heat signature approaching. She backed away slowly, her mind racing through survival strategies. The dragon that emerged was magnificent and terrifying, 30 feet of rippling muscle covered in obsidian scales that absorbed rather than reflected light. Its 6 limbs moved with predatory grace. Intelligence gleamed in its crimson eyes, but not sentience, just the cunning of an apex predator. Lyra heard the excited murmurs from the audience above. They expected a show, a quick but entertaining death. She refused to give them the satisfaction. When the dragon charged, Lyra didn't run. Instead, she dropped to one knee and pressed her forehead to the ground in the ancient posture of respect that predated the empire itself, a gesture her mother had taught her, said to be understood by even the most primitive dragons. The beast skidded to a halt just feet away, its hot breath washing over her. Lyra remained motionless, controlling her fear through measured breathing. A curious rumble emanated from the dragon's chest. It circled her, sniffing, occasionally prodding her with its snout. Finally, it settled onto its haunches, watching her with those intelligent eyes. The audience's disappointed shouts echoed from above. This was not the bloody spectacle they had anticipated. "Thank you," Lyra whispered to the dragon. Slowly rising to her feet, she watched as the creature turned and walked toward one of the tunnels, looking back as if expecting her to follow. The underground journey. Following the dragon into the tunnel, Lyra found herself descending deeper beneath the planet's surface. The dragon's scales generated a faint bioluminescence, enough for her enhanced vision to navigate by. They walked for what seemed like hours, the tunnel occasionally opening into larger chambers filled with crystal formations and underground pools. The silence was broken only by the soft padding of their feet and the occasional drip of water from above. Lyra's mind raced with questions. Why had the dragon spared her? Where were they going? And how long could she survive in this underground maze? Finally, they reached a vast cavern unlike any Lyra had ever seen. The ceiling soared hundreds of feet overhead, embedded with luminous crystals that mimicked a starry sky. The floor was carpeted with a soft, moss-like growth that glowed with each footstep. But most surprising was the structure at the center, a dwelling of some sort, constructed from salvage materials that clearly didn't originate on Draconia Prime. The dragon led her toward this unexpected habitation. As they approached, a figure emerged from within, standing upright on two legs but definitely not Draconian. "Well," said the figure in accented but understandable Imperial Common, "you're certainly not what I expected to fall into the pit today." Lyra's eyes widened as she processed what she was seeing, a human. A species known to her only from intelligence briefings about the distant Sol system. Humans were classified as a primitive but potentially problematic species, still confined to their home system but advancing rapidly. This particular specimen was male, standing just under 6 feet tall, diminutive by Draconian standards. His skin was darkly tanned, his head covered with short black hair, and his face adorned with several days' growth of beard. He wore what appeared to be a modified environment suit, patched in multiple places. "You speak Imperial Common," Lyra said, recovering from her surprise. "And you're not trying to kill me, which makes you the first friendly Draconian I've met," he replied with a wry smile. "I'm Commander Marcus Chen, formerly of the Earth exploration vessel Odyssey." "And you are?" "Lyra of House Solaran, daughter of Emperor Vexus," she answered, watching his expression change from friendly curiosity to cautious tension. "The Emperor's daughter," he repeated slowly. "And you're down here because I was sentenced to death for suggesting that perhaps we shouldn't conquer and subjugate every species we encounter." Lyra gestured to the dragon, which had settled near the dwelling, watching them with apparent contentment. "This one seems to have other ideas." Marcus laughed, a sharp, unexpected sound. "That's Obsidian. He's selective about who he eats. Saved my life when I crashed here 3 years ago." He studied her for a moment. "So the Emperor's daughter is a peace advocate. That's not what our intelligence suggested about your civilization." "We weren't always conquerors," Lyra said quietly. "There was a time when the Draconian Empire was built on mutual respect and cultural exchange. Something changed about a century ago, after my grandfather's time." Marcus nodded thoughtfully. "Come inside. If you're going to be Obsidian's newest rescue, you might as well be comfortable." Unlikely allies. The interior of the dwelling was surprisingly sophisticated. Salvage technology from what must have been Marcus's crash ship had been repurposed into basic amenities, a water filtration system, heat regulation, even primitive lighting powered by crystal batteries. "You've adapted well," Lyra observed, taking in the blend of human ingenuity and local materials. "Humans are good at that," Marcus replied, offering her a container of water. "Adaptation is practically our superpower. That and an almost pathological optimism." He gestured to a makeshift map on one wall showing an intricate network of tunnels. "The dragons have been digging for millennia. This pit connects to a labyrinth that runs under half the continent. I've been exploring and mapping it since Obsidian adopted me." He pointed to a red mark on the map. "My ship crashed here, about 20 miles from the capital. I was investigating your system, first contact reconnaissance. Your planetary defenses detected us and fired before we could identify ourselves." "First contact reconnaissance," Lyra repeated. "You mean you were sent to assess our threat level?" "To make peaceful contact," Marcus corrected, though his slight hesitation suggested her interpretation wasn't entirely wrong. "Earth has been watching your expansion with concern." Lyra felt a flicker of hope. "So Earth knows about the Empire's conquests?" "Earth and a coalition of other independent systems. We've been preparing, sharing technology, establishing defensive protocols." He studied her with newfound interest. "You really are against the Empire's policies, aren't you?" "I believe we've lost our way," Lyra admitted. "My mother taught me the old histories before she disappeared. The Empire was meant to unite, not subjugate. There's evidence that something fundamentally changed during my grandfather's rule, policies shifted, attitudes hardened. My father was raised in this new tradition." Marcus was quiet for a moment. "And now you've been thrown away for questioning it." He sighed. Well, Princess, welcome to the resistance of 2. 3, counting obsidian. Resistance? Lyra asked. Marcus's expression turned serious. I've been doing more than mapping tunnels down here. These caverns run beneath your capital's primary defense installations, governmental facilities, even the palace itself. He hesitated, then continued. I've been gathering intelligence, planting communication devices, preparing for the day when Earth decides it can't wait for your empire to reach Sol. Lyra should have been outraged at this admission of espionage, but instead felt only resignation. So your people plan to strike first? Only if necessary, Marcus said. We prefer a diplomatic solution, but your empire doesn't exactly have a reputation for negotiations. What if there was another way? Lyra said suddenly. What if we could change the empire from within? Marcus raised an eyebrow. You've just been sentenced to death by your own father. I'm not sure you're in a position to influence imperial policy. Not yet, Lyra agreed. But think about it. Why was I sent to the pit rather than simply executed? The judgment of scales is an ancient tradition, rarely used. It's as much a test as a punishment. And surviving means what exactly? Traditionally, it means the great dragons found the accused worthy. It carries significant religious and cultural weight. Lyra began pacing, her mind racing. If I return alive and under the apparent protection of a great dragon, they couldn't simply ignore it. Marcus finished her thought. But would they actually listen to your ideas about peace? Perhaps not immediately, Lyra admitted. But it would create an opening, a chance to be heard. She stopped pacing and looked directly at him. And if I returned with evidence of a previously unknown species that had managed to survive here, adapt, and even befriend the great dragons? Marcus's eyes widened slightly. You want to use me as an example of peaceful coexistence. Your very existence challenges the fundamental assumptions of imperial doctrine, that other species are inherently inferior and incapable of harmony with draconian life. Lyra's silver eyes gleamed with newfound purpose. You said humans are adaptable and optimistic. Well, I'm about to test both qualities. The plan unfolds. Over the following weeks, Lyra and Marcus worked together to develop their audacious plan. Using Marcus's knowledge of the tunnel system and Lyra's understanding of imperial politics, they crafted a strategy that could potentially change the course of galactic history. The key, Lyra explained as they studied the tunnel maps, is timing. The Council of Scales meets in 3 days to discuss the expansion into the Meridian sector. If we can interrupt that meeting with proof that peaceful coexistence is possible. Marcus nodded, adding modifications to one of his communication devices. I've been in contact with Earth through quantum entanglement transmitters. They're willing to hold off their defensive preparations if there's a genuine chance for peace. Obsidian had proven to be more than just a guardian. The ancient dragons seemed to understand their conversations, occasionally providing guidance through the tunnel system or bringing them resources from the surface. Marcus had learned to interpret the dragon's various sounds and gestures over his years of cohabitation. He's been waiting, Marcus realized one evening as they watched Obsidian arrange stones in patterns that resembled star maps. All this time, he's been waiting for someone who could bridge the gap between the old ways and the new. Lyra approached the dragon carefully, placing her hand on his massive snout. The great dragons remember when the Empire was different, don't they? When dragons and draconians worked together instead of the dragons being used as weapons. Obsidian's rumbling response seemed to confirm her theory. Their plan was dangerous and required precise timing. Using Marcus's planted communication devices, they would broadcast simultaneously to both the Imperial Council and Earth's coalition, demonstrating that cooperation was possible. But first, they needed to reach the surface and infiltrate the Imperial Palace. The old tunnels connect to the palace's ancient foundations, Marcus explained, pointing to a section of his map. Your ancestors built on top of the original dragon nests. Most of the passages have been sealed, but I've found a few that remain accessible. Security will be impossible to avoid, Lyra warned. My father's guards will have orders to kill me on sight for escaping the pit. Then we don't avoid them, Marcus said with a grin. We give them something else to worry about. On the appointed day, they began their ascent. Obsidian led them through a maze of tunnels that grew progressively more complex as they neared the surface. The dragon's bioluminescence dimmed as they approached areas where it might be detected, relying instead on Marcus's salvaged lighting equipment. Hours before the council meeting, they reached a junction that branched toward both the palace and the main communication array. Marcus would split off to the array while Lyra and Obsidian made their dramatic entrance to the council chambers. Remember, Marcus said as they prepared to separate, you're not just representing yourself anymore. You're representing the possibility that the galaxy doesn't have to be conquered, it can be united. Lyra nodded, her resolve strengthening. And you remember that if this fails, you'll need to warn Earth immediately. My father won't hesitate to accelerate the invasion timeline. They clasped hands, human and draconian, in a gesture that would have been unthinkable weeks earlier. For peace, Lyra said. For the future, Marcus replied. As they parted ways, Obsidian let out a low, resonant call that echoed through the tunnels, a sound that had not been heard in the palace for over a century. The great dragon was returning home, and he was bringing change with him. The return. The Council of Scales was in heated debate when the ancient stones of the chamber floor began to vibrate. Emperor Vexus paused mid-sentence, his enhanced senses detecting something that made his blood run cold, the call of a great dragon, coming from beneath the palace itself. The floor exploded upward in a shower of crystal and stone. Obsidian's massive form emerged from the depths, his obsidian scales gleaming in the chamber's light. On his back, impossibly alive, sat Princess Lyra. The assembled nobles fell silent, their gemstone eyes wide with shock. Several guards moved forward, but stopped when Obsidian's crimson gaze fixed on them with unmistakable warning. My lords and father, Lyra said, her voice carrying clearly through the chamber as she slid from Obsidian's back, I bring word from the depths. The great dragons have spoken, and they have found me worthy. Emperor Vexus's expression was unreadable. The pit was meant to be your tomb, daughter. How do you stand before us? Because I learned something in the darkness that you have forgotten, Lyra replied, stepping forward while Obsidian remained protectively behind her. I learned that strength comes not from conquest, but from understanding. Not from fear, but from respect. At that moment, Marcus's voice crackled through the chamber's communication system, his transmission reaching both the Imperial Council and Earth's coalition simultaneously. Leaders of the galaxy, Marcus began, I am Commander Marcus Chen of Earth. For 3 years, I have lived beneath your capital, not as a prisoner, but as a guest of the great dragons. I have witnessed the honor and wisdom that still exists within the Draconian Empire, embodied by Princess Lyra, who chose exile rather than abandon her principles. The chamber erupted in shocked murmurs. A human, alive on Draconia Prime? It was impossible. The coalition worlds offer you a choice, Marcus continued. Continue your path of conquest and face the united resistance of 100 worlds, or join us in building a galaxy where all species can thrive together. Princess Lyra has shown us that Draconians and humans can work as allies. Let this be the beginning of a new age. Emperor Vexus rose slowly from his throne, his towering frame casting a shadow over the chamber. You dare bring an alien spy into our sacred halls? I bring proof that we are not alone in the universe, Lyra replied firmly. And that we don't have to face that universe as conquerors. The great dragons chose to spare us both, Father. Perhaps it's time we listen to their wisdom. Obsidian moved forward, his massive head lowering to face the Emperor directly. The dragon's rumbling vocalization filled the chamber, not a threat, but a communication in the ancient draconic tongue that predated the Empire itself. Emperor Vexus's eyes widened as he processed the dragon's words. The old compact, he whispered. The great dragons invoke the old compact. What compact? Demanded High Priest Drax. The original agreement between our species, Lyra explained, her mother's teachings finally making sense. Dragons and Draconians were partners once, not master and weapon. The compact promised that dragons would guide us toward wisdom, not destruction. The Emperor stared at his daughter for a long moment, then at the dragon who had brought her back from the depths. Finally, he looked at the assembled nobles, seeing his own doubt reflected in their faces. Perhaps, he said slowly, it is time to remember who we were before we became what we are. The negotiations that followed were complex and often heated, but they were negotiations, not ultimatums. Marcus emerged from the tunnels to join the discussions, representing Earth's coalition. Obsidian remained throughout, a silent but powerful reminder of the ancient wisdom that had guided the Draconian Empire before it lost its way. Months later, the first joint Draconian-human exploration vessel departed from Draconia Prime, carrying both species toward distant stars not to conquer, but to explore and learn. Princess Lyra stood at the observation deck, watching the stars whirl past, with Marcus beside her planning their next diplomatic mission. You know, Marcus said, when I crashed here, I never expected to help prevent a galactic war. And I never expected to find hope in the depths of a dragon pit, Lyra replied. But perhaps that's the point. The best futures are the ones we never see coming. Behind them, through the ship's communication system, they could hear the voices of a dozen species, former enemies now working together toward a common goal. The galaxy was vast and full of challenges, but for the first time in a century, the Draconian Empire faced them not as conquerors, but as partners. The great dragons had judged wisely. The age of conquest was over. The age of cooperation had begun. The end. While others sleep, humans evolve. Don't miss the next step, subscribe now.